Turn-based RPGs are a special kind of game. The kind of game players knew once you jumped in, you were bound to embark on an epic journey. Rich characters, worlds so robust and large they would span over multiple continents. Monsters and evils so gigantic, so destructive that they could erase cities with one fell swoop of their power. An epic journey that showed you the dazzling beauty of the likes you have never seen, and also pain that could be felt long after the blow had been struck. Before this genre, games simply were not like this. These games are where video game legends were made. I could think back to all the amazing things I've seen. When Dart finally attained his Dragoon powers in Legend of Dragoon. Literally every Final Fantasy 15 summon. I'm gonna give a little shout out to the Titan. When I finally beat an enemy in Front Mission 3 feeling like, man, I just boosted my role with the best gear. Meeting the entire cast from Final Fantasy X for the first time in those sweet cutscenes. I could go all day. Personally for me, the best thing about these kind of games is being given the chance to experience, to meet the characters that inhabited these games. It's not simply because a character was cool looking, because granted they were, but it was the very reason you came to see why they were so cool. It was how unbelievably and well fleshed out they were. A new depth was achieved in character exploration. I've come to learn not just who they were. I'd seen their home, their town. I'd learned who their parents were, who their friends were, who they held near and dear to their heart, what they loved and also what they hated. It was practically like a real person. Not only were you taking on an epic journey, you were taking on an epic journey with comrades, someone you could connect to, and in turn, like any relationship, you learn and you grow from them. And the game design allowed you the ability to explore the world, and with that, the characters that lived in it. This is the strength of a turn-based RPG. It is not stricken by a short gameplay experience, not at all. In fact, it's almost guaranteed a long journey that required hours upon hours just to get through. This allowed for a story to be told in a much bigger way. The story needed to be big, complex, and expansive to succeed in grabbing all of us, the players. It did in a way other games simply could not. The years would go on and turn-based would continue to take us on these wild world adventures. But somewhere along the way, something changed. One day things weren't as bright for the genre. The turn-based game began to become more scarce in today's video game scene. And worse, many started to feel like the game genre simply wasn't enough. People felt as though something was missing, or some would even say was lacking in these games. As games kept being made, we learned that this was even a question in the developer's mind. They felt the same, a need for something new, and began trying all kinds of ways to remedy this fatigue. Implementing different quirks to the game, some made it so characters could move around in the environment to keep things fresh and lively, while others simply placed timers on the player's turn that would punish a player for not thinking quick enough. Were we witnessing the attempt of simply trying to keep an old mechanic from losing its relevance, or was it something else? It was the year 1987. Final Fantasy I was born by Daddy Hironobu Sakaguchi and Square. It was the first of its kind, second to Dragon Quest. Final Fantasy I was a phenomenon. It is said to be one of the reasons that turn-based RPG genre is so popular to this day. And history would show Final Fantasy and Square Enix's name would come to be synonymous with the turn-based RPG genre. Some of you may know this, but Final Fantasy was inspired by
There is no escape from the realm of
Dungeons and Dragons, the fantasy tabletop RPG. A big inspiration that came from this was the ability to have characters assigned to a specific class and therefore have unique abilities. This being your knight, mages, you know what I'm talking about. Another huge influence that was adapted and would become a core mechanic to the entire genre was something that all board games shared as well, and would become the very name of the genre, turn-based. Like every board game, a player must take turns to play, just like chess. A lot like tabletop games, it was a game that relied on strategy and wits. This meant every decision counted. To compare Final Fantasy 1 to the games that were released the same year, you would see there's clearly a different experience to be had when it comes to gameplay.
ファミコン用カセットメタルギア発売中。Konami.
To name a few, you had Contra, Metal Gear, Afterburner, Street Fighter, and Double Dragon. All came out the same year Final Fantasy 1 did. These were what you were used to. These were action games, games that focused on gameplay mechanics that were fast-paced, factored in reaction time and adaptability, and usually memorizing the pattern of your enemy. It was all about being quick on your toes. Final Fantasy was a new breed of game. A game that wasn't about action, it was about the story. Both genres of games equally great, yet they differ tremendously in their strength and experience.
Alright.
These design choices are ultimately done by the developers, tailoring their game into that unique experience you've come to love. It is the art of balancing all these individual factors that in the end make the game we love so dearly. One of the biggest challenges developers must face when making a game is the limitation of hardware and resources. Everyone wishes a game could have everything, but in reality, this is a pretty tall order. Considering that game development is a business that needs to finance its own endeavor at a reasonable rate and time, it must ensure making the game is in budget, cost effective, and obviously a great game that hopefully will sell at least enough to make a profit. It's a circle of life that needs to be balanced and maintained to succeed. This is precisely why the turn-based RPG is such a great solution to make a game like Final Fantasy. Under the circumstance of the technological power of the time, the turn-based system is an excellent answer to a game that needs to focus on robust environment, character, and story, rather than the action itself. By simplifying the action in the gameplay, you remove the insane amount of work and resources it would take to generate the action when in truth the game is about the story. It's important to remember there's a balancing dance of creating a great game experience and also making it financially viable. Let's compare two games that have the exact opposite experience, Final Fantasy 1 and Contra. Contra's developers spend most of their resources on creating an engaging, action-packed experience that takes precedent over the story. How much so? Let me show you if you haven't played this game. From the beginning of the game, the only story beat you can work with is not some intro cutscene, some box of dialogue, or anything. Nothing. All you get is literally the word Contra. Contra. Which, if you didn't know, means a member of a guerrilla force in Nicaragua that opposed the left-wing Sandinista government in 1979 to 1990. I didn't know either, but Google did. This is what you're working with. Oh, and they did mention that in the beginning of stage 1 that you're in the jungle, so there's that. But I'm not saying that this is bad by any means. Just like I was saying, Contra's developers knew what they wanted to do with the game, and they focused entirely on that, which was the action, not the story. These limitations are still very real in today's video game world. They may not look as simple as sprites, but game developers still have to manage their games under time and appropriate financial situations. But here's what's different, alright? The AAA scene in video games has become bigger than ever, more expensive than ever. We have reached a point in console history that games have never looked so damn good. We're not talking about sprites anymore, we're talking about the cutting edge technology, we're talking about like 3D models that look like we're hitting uncanny valley like it's nobody's business. The AAA is reaching for the stars, and they should. I got 2 words for you: realism and immersion. If the goal of the new AAA is realism, I think companies like Square Enix knew that their own franchise could not rely on a system like the turn-based RPG anymore. The reason you can't rely on turn-based RPG for that is immersion is felt not only with story but with the action as well. If the traditional RPG meant to lean on the story more than action, this goes completely against the immersion experience. To achieve that immersion, the player needs to feel engaged, especially in the thick of it. This harkens back to the action games that give players the ability to react based on reflexes and quick thinking. Final Fantasy XV suffered as a result. It was a well-received game, don't get me wrong, but it was widely said that the game lacked the fulfilling deep story that the franchise was known for. This is probably a byproduct of the developer spending a much larger time on a new game mechanic that they had never had to deal with their previous titles. These hiccups are just what happens when you try something new. It's expected, and ultimately, regardless of that, I think they made the right move. You can score big, but chances are you're going to fall a few times on the way. No one does a switch on the first shot. And honestly, once they hit it right, these games are freaking amazing. So does this mean that the turn-based RPG is dead? That in today's gaming world, the turn-based RPG is no longer a viable approach to making games? Because I know exactly what some of you are already saying. What about games like Persona 5 and the South Park series? Weren't those AAA games? Weren't those turn-based RPG games that were a big success? Isn't that proof? And to that I would say, yeah, you're right. I brought up the AAA game to make a point about how the industry today makes games differently than before. I think what people come to see as the death of the turn-based RPG is really those game companies looking to innovate in the new. Companies like Square Enix are looking to the future to try finding out where they fit in this new generation of video games. Turn-based RPGs is what got them here today, but now they have to look towards the future to see who they are now. Turn-based RPG in some way is stepping to the side to make room for the new, but that doesn't mean they will be forgotten. If you Google right now RPGs in 2018, you will see that there is a bunch of them around. Shoot, one of the biggest games on the Switch right now is Octopath, and that game is your straight up turn-based RPG like the classics. And sometimes it's a matter of just looking at where these games are now. If you were to look into the Japanese gaming scene today, it is absolutely flooded with RPGs. And it's not just because people love them, but it also has to do with how they're playing their games. To get things straight, the Japanese game scene is all about the handheld device. Many gamers are simply playing on the go, whether it's on the train, on break, after work, during work, who knows, you name it, it's there. It's not necessarily about the best looking game anymore. It's not about having these heavy consoles. It's about availability. This is why the handheld device like those Nintendo and even phones are extremely popular, especially in Japan. But like I said, now you're working with limited hardware. And what does well under limited hardware? Well, this is the exact scenario that Final Fantasy 1 was made in. These devices cannot produce the high-end graphics, nor do they have the capability of allowing for super precise controls. This is especially when I'm talking about phone games. But all these issues can and have been remedied by the traditional JRPG. What better genre than a turn-based RPG to use when your day consists of playing in between your day-to-day life? Simply taking out your phone, you make a move, and when it's time to get back to reality, you simply put it back in your pocket. Done. That's how you play. The strength of the turn-based genre is not only is it capable of being played anywhere, but in a scenario such as the one with the phones, it enables the game to be playable in a situation it couldn't have been before. This is why I believe that no one has abandoned the turn-based RPG. And to make a perfect example of this, little game called Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition. This game is a perfect example of the turn-based RPG and how it was designed to fit on the handheld experience, designed to fit where the player was playing. It is the exact same game but fit with simpler graphics and simpler controls you could have on a phone that allows the player to play the entire game by simply tapping their screen. This goes to show you that Square Enix hasn't forgotten at all the turn-based RPG and its history, but understands when it's appropriate to use a certain game mechanic to fulfill the player's need. Even games like Final Fantasy World show that they celebrate their history and lineage and haven't forgotten it. They understood the new wave in the industry, and it's simply doing what it needs to do to keep up with the times. What I'm trying to say is, turn-based is going to be fine. They are not going anywhere. They work and have been proven time and time again, and as such will continue to be used since it's such a successful game mechanic. It seems that it's in our nature to enlarge our fears and imagine the worst possible outcome, like the idea that a certain genre is going to go extinct. But ultimately, I think it's our love for those games that make us fear losing them so much. It's true, today's gaming scene is very different, and you best believe that the next generation is going to look even more different. But things are on the up and up. RPGs in general have become so common in games, it's practically in their DNA. Any game you play today, it's almost impossible to find a game that doesn't have some kind of leveling system or attribute that derives from the RPG. So it may seem like it's fading, but it's very much inside almost all games you play today. And sometimes, if you're willing to just look in a different direction, you'll find that there is a turn-based RPG to be played.